Started. Chairman Barnett, filling game Bain. All right, I believe I'm going to turn it over to, I'm going to ask my committee assistant. Say good. Are we ready for the Zoom? Are they on? Okay, everybody's on. All right. The first presenter, as I understand it, will be, is Miss, is it Highford? Is that correct?
Yes, Kelly Heifert.
Thank you. And I'm going to open the floor to you, Ms. Highford, and you can introduce yourself. Tell the committee members as well as the audience, the members here, and welcome to our hearing today, and hope you're doing well. But introduce yourself and give us the benefit of who you work for, what you do, and I think you understand why we've got you here today is to give the committee a benefit of the work that y'all doing in Minnesota. So with that, I'll just turn the floor over to you.
Great, thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for the welcome to share with you a little bit about the work that we do in Minnesota Department of Corrections. My name is Kelly Heifert. I am the Director of Reentry Services for the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Reentry Services as a unit and part of our division is that we want to ensure that people have the supports and services they need to be successful when they leave prisons and while they're in our communities throughout the state. So we provide pre-release preparation, including things like Minnesota state IDs, duplicate IDs, birth certificates, bridge people to health insurance, do some job preparation, and many other things. We do community partnership development throughout the state, trying to bridge those partnerships into facilities and try to realize where there's gaps throughout the state to close those gaps on the services and things folks need. But why I'm here today is to talk to you about work release, which is also part of the reentry unit. So before I start talking about work release, though, I want to set one piece of the stage for you about Minnesota sentencing, because it does have a little bit to do with our statutory authority for work release. So Minnesota has determinate sentencing in that people know the beginning and the end of their sentence right before they come to us. And it's set up so that people are confined for 2/3 of that sentence, and they're on community supervision then for 1/3 of that sentence. So we use that determinate sentencing, 2/3 in, 1/3 on supervision. So work release is actually provided through a Minnesota statute that allows the Department of Corrections to set up a conditional release for men and women who have served at least 50% of that incarceration time. So remember that 2/3 sentence. We could have the authority to release people after they've done like that first third or 1/2 of the incarceration time. So our statutory authority allows for us to provide this conditional release. And typically it's we place people in other secure community locations with the primary goal of going to work and working a minimum of 32 hours per week. When we think about secure community locations, we require things like 24-hour staffing. If we want to know that people are on conditional release and being accountable, we require the programs and spaces that we use to be 24-hour staffed. Frequently, those are nonprofit partners who have corrections residential programs. We could call those halfway houses, right? Sometimes they change their name a little bit. We may also use jail settings in some spaces in greater Minnesota or more rural areas where there aren't these kind of halfway house or high volume of people who are returning to the state. We can also allow people to go home. And we might do that under some structured release with electronic monitoring like GPS or some other capable device to know exactly where they are. So while we have the statutory authority to allow people to release at that 50% of their incarceration time served, historically, we have allowed people only 8 months of release. So as they're coming up on that 2/3 of their incarceration time, if they've served the 1/2, we've given people 8 months of early release. Just last July, we changed our policy to say, let's give people up to 1 year of release. It was a number that was made up some time ago. It's not based on science. So we decided to do a prototype and say, how would people do if we gave them at least up to a year? So we could have some people that fit the criteria that maybe only have a minimum of 60 days because they're in our department, right, incarcerated a short time, have to serve the half, only have 2 months left. But we can allow longer term committed people the full 12 months of release time. One of the first things that we do in screening people for eligibility is we use our validated risk assessment. So it's a validated automated recidivism risk assessment that we use as the first marker for screening. So if someone is at a very high risk of committing a new offense when they're released, we do not allow them out on work release. That's just not something we do. Our goal would be to have them be in incarceration and participate in programming that might reduce that risk. So we reserve work release for medium and lower risk people. Another exclusion that we have in policy is that, so we use that recidivism tool, and it does have some weight around institution misconduct. So misconduct would be things like major kinds of discipline, fights inside, maybe some kind of theft or threats of violence. We typically look pretty hard at folks that have a history of that, especially in the recent past, before we would allow them the early conditional release from prison on work release. So it's not always a screen out, but what were the reasons for it and what have they done since to maybe correct or rectify that challenging or kind of behavior they have? And would they be able to participate on work release with support? What is it that they need in order to change? Because it is part of a transition out to the community. Another caveat that we have, and you'll hear from Lisa Wojcik shortly about MNCOR, is if we have people who are maybe on the higher risk spectrum, but not all the way up to very high, or they've not demonstrated a lot of job skills in the past, been incarcerated a really long time, we might look at partnering with MNCOR in the Bridge program. I think maybe Lisa will talk a little bit about Bridge, but it's an opportunity for people to be released on work release, but to be in almost like transitional employment with our MNCOR industries. So there's some specific work they do, but we have more staffing, more support. They can use that as a work reference and a leg up to get that job experience so they can work in private kinds of employment and community after some time. Let's see, a couple other things to note. So I had mentioned that we have kind of a straight up exclusion for people who are very high risk of committing new offenses, or people who have broad community notification and registration requirements. Part of our statutory authority is that we're able to release people that meet a certain threshold for public risk and public perception. Words that in the 1960s maybe meant something that different than they do now, but we still don't feel that by and large, people in communities would be okay with the department releasing people who are listed as sex offenses, right? So we don't do that. Those folks are excluded from work release. The opposite is also true. I say it often to our staff. If they're low, they gotta go. It's my coined term that says if people are low risk to committing a new offense, we want to get them out of prison as soon as we can and for the longest length of time. Prison beds should be reserved for folks that we know need the most change and those folks that we should have some fear about. And lower risk people don't present that. That's our goal, to get low risk people out and on work release and working and living their lives and becoming taxpayers and all those things we want. So on average, Minnesota Department of Corrections, our facilities, we incarcerate a low number of people. So across our state, I think our population isn't even above 8,000 at this point. So work release at any given time has about 200 people out on work release. It ebbs and flows throughout the year down to about 180, as high as up to 220 or 240. Typically, we serve 600 people annually. So if we count all the individual folks who are served, there are 600 who benefited from work release this past year. People on work release also pay to stay. So they contribute $10 per day while they're at the residential correctional facility or while they're in a jail, kind of on that Huber setting. They're paying $10 a day towards their work release, which comes out of their paychecks once they start earning. I think somewhere we were asked to say what doesn't work well, right? What doesn't work well. So our policies and our locations sometimes limit who and where people can participate. So in our Twin Cities metro locations, so Minneapolis and St. Paul proper, to some of our bigger outstate cities like Duluth, that's on the Superior border, and down south and Rochester by like the Mayo Clinic, we have those halfway houses, which are perfect places for people to be in community settings and get support. If they're in greater Minnesota, however, we maybe use those jail spaces. Jails aren't always the best to transition people out of. It's like prison, but a different spot, but closer to home. But if someone's in a location that we don't have jail beds contracted for, we don't get to put them out on work release. We just simply say there isn't a spot for you to be able to go to. Some of our supervision rules and the ways that we supervise people after release limit us to where we can release people out to on work release as well, because those counties that have the supervision have to be able to approve that new location. So we don't use it as a transplant program to release people from prison to the Twin Cities so that they can live and be supervised there, right? We want to go get people home to wherever home is, but it is a limit. The other is Minnesota has several tribal nations inside the Minnesota border. We don't have locations that are very near to some of those tribal nations. So for American Indian men and women, work release is often limiting. And looking at a way to produce equity and make it a provided service for everyone, we need to think about different partnerships to develop appropriate locations and spaces for anyone who's low risk to be able to go home and go to work release. A couple other things that don't work well. We have a work release policy, which means you go to work, right? So when we set policy and stipulation that says people have to work 32 to 40 hours per week, what if someone who's incarcerated with us has differing abilities or has disabilities and is low risk? Does that mean because of those disabilities or differing abilities, they have to be confined? What are their abilities and how do we create program space for them to be able to use those and to go home? Or maybe to get some vocational assistance or programming and go home and participate and then get on with their lives. So we have to think of some new avenues in order to be more inclusive to everybody who is low risk and should not be sitting in prison with those sucking up the bed space, right? Reserve those spots. Couple exciting things that we're working towards in Minnesota is this last legislative session brought us the Healthy Start Act, which is embedded in the same statute as work release. It will allow us to release to those same kinds of or develop our own secure kinds of programs and transition services for pregnant mothers or postpartum mothers up to 8 months to be able to spend a year in a different setting other than prison with their babies. So that was just this last session, and we're just starting to figure out what those policies could look like with our community partners across the state and making that work. Another exciting thing on the horizon, I'm sure it's similar in your state, that Pell grants are making it easier for incarcerated people to pursue higher education. So with the ability for people to go to college, our statute also allows us not only just work release, but it does allow education and vocational release. We don't have policies for it. We've not released people for that in the last 20 years since I've been around this work. But we could allow people who are lower risk, who are Pell eligible, are already invested in college. We could allow them an opportunity to go home or to go to their college location and to finish that degree and putting them in a transition spot to further their education. So possibilities that we're working on this year. And finally, I am hopeful that Minnesota will continue to allow risk to drive our business, real recidivism risk. So use the science to predict who really are our best candidates for transitional and early release like this, so that we are reserving our prison beds for those who need it most. The research is clear that when we use risk assessments to help coordinate interventions and make these kinds of decisions, it always outweighs our professional judgments. So while we've said we have 8 months of release, we're going to turn it to 12. I don't know, is 16 months better? We can use the data to help us really drive and pinpoint how long people do well and what they need. And as well, think about things according to risk and not always of what public perception was in 1960 when the statute was built. So those are conversations we're going to have this year. And I'm hopeful that we can share more with you in our journey. And I'd love to see if Mississippi turns out some type of work release opportunities as well. So are there questions I can answer for you?
Thank you very much for your presentation. I'll turn it over to the committee members. Anyone have any questions, Ms. Highford? Yes, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. Highford, for appearing. Minnesota Department of Corrections budget is about $624 million plus. How much of that is spent on reentry work release?
So the work release budget specifically that covers about those 600 people per year that are released. I looked today, it's about a $5 million budget, which is offset by about $500,000 in participant portion that they pay. And that is the supervision of people on work release is covered by 4 agents. So at any time, those supervision agents have about 40 or 50 released people on their caseloads, and they're screening people who are coming into the program, meeting with them to prep them. So it's about 4 agents, 1 work release director, all those various locations that people reside at, total of about $5 million.
What about reentry in total?
Boy, the total of direct appropriations for reentry services is about $3 million. It's about $3 million in the staffing that's required to provide pre-release services inside the preparations that we do, some contractual arrangements for community organizations to come inside to do some portions of that education and pre-release planning. It's about $3 million.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else have any questions on the committee? Lady Mines.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. The recidivism risk assessment screening that you mentioned several times, is that sort of like national standards, or is it something that Minnesota came up with on its own? Is it standardized, or is it case by case? How does that work exactly?
So Minnesota has used a couple different risk assessment tools throughout time. Most recently, we use the Level of Service Case Management Inventory, LSCMI, and that is a professional produced right through an interview process individually with someone. We are very fortunate to have a great research and evaluation department, though, who has studied risk and the different variations of specifically Minnesota's incarcerated population. And they have developed an automated risk assessment tool that becomes part of our offender management database that we have. So it produces the risk assessment for us. So it's automated risk assessment at this point that's specific to Minnesota incarcerated people.
Thank you.
Any other questions from any members? I have a couple of questions. I want to ask you, you mentioned early on in your presentation about those individuals that had long terms of incarceration that are coming up for release. And in Mississippi, we passed legislation that we're going to have some of those individuals that were not eligible for parole that have become eligible for parole by virtue of passing legislation signed by the governor this year. Do y'all, that work release program, is it tailored? You mentioned about those low risk do you assess those long-term inmates in the same manner as you assess the short-term inmates? I know that there's different protocol, but how do you go through the process, and what advice would you give to us if we're going to start programming those individuals for release, how we would do it, and how do y'all do it?
So I'm thinking specifically like some of the men and women who are with us on more like life sentences, comparable, right, to the people that you're talking about. They may have been in the system for 14 to 25 years. So anyone who's in Minnesota Department of Corrections has that risk assessment. And typically really long-term people, even if it is murder and a heinous crime that occurred 20, 25 years ago, typically they're very low risk of ever hurting someone again. They may be low risk, but they have a lot of release needs because they have been locked up. So what kind of community connections do they have? Where could they even go home to when there is no home anymore, right? So I would say, you know, things that we do with them, those men and women do often go through the halfway houses and are allowed on a work release. So they would have up to that 1 year of work release. Before they leave, they're going through our reentry program includes pre-release classes where men and women who are about 4 months to release, and this includes long-term people, are part of like a 3-day class where we cover all kinds of reentry barriers and opportunities that people will face when they're leaving. So in an effort to kind of clear those hurdles or to get them prepared for things they'll face. So like, how do I fill out job applications? How do I find open employment? How do I talk about my work skills and my previous felony and what happened, right? Opportunities to try to find housing in the location that they want to build their home or their home going home to. So they go through those classes. But I think specifically if you're looking at releasing long-term people, a program or a location that can support those needs would be more effective than putting them directly home into their own private residence. A place that someone can walk with them, whether it's a paid staff person or volunteer, to serve as that mentor and navigator, maybe troubleshooter, because times certainly have changed from 20 years ago when people were locked up to what they are today. Look at all of us, right? I'm talking to you in Mississippi. So how does that happen? So longer term people who are released typically are low risk, but have a lot of needs. So programs that can support those needs in a location like a community corrections residential center, some kind of sober support housing would be very helpful in their transition.
How many community correction residential centers do y'all have in Minnesota?
So I think without counting, I would say there's around a dozen. And these are all private nonprofit entities that we do contract with. And most of them specifically only have corrections clients. So it could be men and women who are released from prison for work release or for intensive supervised release, who would otherwise be homeless. So we need to make sure they're somewhere to supervise them. They could also be clients that are coming to stay with them as a halfway mark from they're supervised on probation in a county. And instead of going to prison, the county's choosing to put them in a halfway house location, halfway to prison. Either it gets right, and you do what you need to, or you'll go to prison or you go home. So they're a mixture, but mostly they are corrections-based clients.
So you're telling me that some of the community correction residential housing has a blended population of first-time offenders, never been to prison before, and those that are long-term inmates that are coming out. Is that a fair statement?
It could be, yeah. We tend to, however, try to separate our work release populations from our intensive supervised release population. So some of those probation spaces would likely use programs that have that same lower risk men and women who are residing there.
Okay, and you know what the budget is for that particular, what I would characterize as transitional housing? You know what that budget is for that particular program?
Yeah, so if we look even at the work release budget itself, That 5 million includes the rental on all of those spaces. So jail
Okay,
spaces and halfway houses.
so you include some jail spacing that you have open bedding beds that are not being occupied for transitional housing. You don't prefer that, but you use some of those. Is that a fair statement?
Actually, in our contracts, we are only paying when those bed spaces are occupied. So we could have a contract with one of the nonprofit programs that we pay a per diem rate. Those per diem rates we average $68 per day. Some of the per diems are as much as 75 to 85. And we only pay when someone is in that space, when someone is staying.
Are there any avenues by which employers or nonprofits or private entities can contribute to your Department of Corrections to offset some of that money, some of that cost?
We have not, but that's a good way for us of thinking about it. We're walking down an avenue right now with a large national-based employer, actually, that's looking to kind of develop some pipeline of skilled workers. And that could be one avenue we could look at. So we don't currently do that, but we sure could in partnership.
Does your legislation authorize that? The language in your legislation that you have in place now authorize that? Or do you have to put that?
Yeah, it doesn't authorize it, but it doesn't deter us or exclude us from doing that. Because really the statutory authority, I'll have to just do a little kidding here, but I had told our commissioner once, I'm like, you have more powers than like Superman if you look at that authority, because it is pretty broad. You know, it says that we can release people at this 50% mark. We don't choose to straight up 50%, but that they can go to other correctional facilities. They could go to community-based programs, and really they could go home. So we are not limited by that. It gives us the authority in statute, though, to charge people a portion of their own stay for board and lodging. That's what it does provide us. But it doesn't necessarily provide the funding for the halfway houses. It's not connected. The statute isn't connected to the appropriation for it.
Thank you. What is your prison population now? You said about 8,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's about what it is. It had been as high as 10,000 a few years ago. We'd made some changes in how we respond to technical violations. So when people are released, and COVID has really changed our population. So it's less than 8,000 right now.
What is your state population in relation to your prison population?
You know, I don't know. Do you? I'm looking at Lisa. Do you have any idea? Yeah, I don't either.
Y'all need about 3,000 more inmates that y'all think y'all can take up?
We'll take those open bed spaces, especially right now. I mean, even in COVID, when we were trying to free up some spaces, right? So while we were still fuller, probably closer to 9,000, 8,500. We did use our work release authority to allow for some people to go directly home. So low and medium risk people who are incarcerated for non-violent offenses or non-victim offenses, direct victims, we allowed them to go home. If they had an approvable address, we released them up to 60 and 90 days early. And we are still doing that. And we're going to follow the data to see, does it work? What do those final 60 or 90 days of incarceration matter for someone? If they're very low risk and they have a place to go home to that's approvable, can we just bridge them home and put them on work release and monitoring? So we're taking a look at that too.
Chairman Fillingham gave me information that it's about 5.6 million is the population in Minnesota. Does that sound about right?
Okay. Sure. Yes, I'll go with that today. I'm like, Google would probably know quicker than me. So
right. Well, he did a head count. The one thing do y'all have any reentry that's directly related or connected to the judiciary through the court system that is a direct, we had a reentry court, a piece of legislation that made it through both chambers and hit the floor on the house and ran into a snag. Do y'all have reentry courts up there? And also want to know whether or not y'all have any other intervention courts that may be connected to reentry, drug courts, veterans courts, mental health courts, things of that nature that are connected to Department of Corrections. And if so, do those programs work seamlessly with y'all, or are there problems if you have those? That's a big question, but I think you know I'm headed.
Yeah. So we, the state does not have any reentry courts from prison to communities. So I think too, it could be a difference in how we're set up. So in Minnesota, we have a hearings and release authority, that there's a separate unit through an executive officer that kind of functions as the court for release authority for men and women. So conditions of release, any violations go through that hearings and release unit, and those are guided by statutory rules. So if you're ever interested, we could get those to you. So it's separate from any kind of court services or court jurisdiction. So that's part of it. So those cases, though, as violations come up where people, supervision agents are trying to address violation behavior, so drug use in community, someone who is not responding to try to get a job, frequently the hearings and release unit would work like that kind of reentry court, right? In talking with the agent and maybe the release person to figure out what are the conditions of release that we need to change to get you compliant. Those are called restructures, but we don't typically, Department of Corrections, I'm not aware of any courts that do this work specifically with us. There are courts, though, that do have some drug courts, domestic violence courts. I think there's some mental health courts. So I could get you some follow-up information if you'd like about those court jurisdictions that have that kind of work, if that would be helpful.
Thank you. And are that housing that you referenced, that community-based correctional housing, are those individuals that are going through those programs, are they accessible, of course, accessible to those particular housing options as an alternative to Department of Correction incarceration?
Can you say that again? I'm sorry, I missed the first.
I'm asking whether or not the courts have access through their sentencing mechanisms to access the community corrections housing that you referenced earlier through the court system. What I mean is, you have to be convicted felons to go to your or can it be under non-adjudication or deferred sentencing or deferred prosecution?
So I'm not aware that Minnesota courts use those same programs, but I am aware that federal pretrial services and federal supervision does use those same contract with those same properties. So someone could be on a federal pretrial status, and as a requirement is located at one of those halfway houses.
Can you tell, that's my last question, I promise. As compared to the violent versus non-violent offenders that go through your work program, can you tell the committee and other participants what is your success rate, violent versus non-violent? And I know those are big categories, but could you give us whether or not you're having more success out of non-violent or those violent offenders that are getting out after long-term incarceration time?
Yeah, we don't have research that separates out the two. Okay. So we don't have any research that separates out the two, but I can tell you for people who are in work release, I think the fact sheets, so we have these fact sheets, general information sheets, it's less than 2% of people who are out on work release commit a new offense. And I will go out on a limb to tell you that it's not generally people who have violent offenses that are committing new offenses. It's folks who have compounding, all kinds of other issues, chemical dependency issues, right? Kind of behavioral impulsive issues. It's not always related to the assaultive or victim type of offense. It's usually a new nuisance kind of crime that gets them into trouble.
Thank you. Any questions from any members? Mr. Porter. Representative Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question for Ms. I'm sorry, I'm going to butcher your names. Hayfor. Do you have a breakdown of the number of Black prisoners versus white prisoners in the prison population in Minnesota?
I don't have it in front of me, but it is available on our public website. It's called like a daily offender profile card, and it shows at each facility all kinds of different breakdowns by culture, by race, by education level, by most counties committed there. It's a wealth of information on those documents.
Chairman Barnett.
Thank you. One question is, the transitional affairs that you all have, is, can you tell me what is the success rate of that and how many individuals actually find jobs with your transition affairs?
So we have not collected data regarding the actual outcomes of those transition fairs. And they're set up less about direct employment and more about connections to community resources and providers. So it's kind of like you or I going to a community resource fair. There could be a table set up for different kinds of halfway house or housing supports. There could be employment agencies there who commonly folks go for assistance and help, all the way to healthcare providers and insurance folks. So it's kind of a broad array of resources, less specifically about employment.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Halford. We're going to move. Anybody have any other questions? We can maybe move on to Ms. Lisa Wojcik. Is that the way you pronounce that?
You pronounce it Wojcik, kind of like voided check.
I knew that. I was just seeing if you knew your last name.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for being here today. We appreciate y'all taking your time out of your busy day to provide information to us. It's very critical to us that we get some of this information so we can move forward legislation that will work reentry the best way possible in Mississippi. So, Lisa, we'll turn it over to you and tell us what you do up there and what your responsibilities are. And floor is open. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Lisa Wojcik. I'm currently the director of our MNCOR industry program. Right now, we operate in 6 of our correctional facilities, and then we have a small program called Bridge at our central office. We employ about 120 civilian staff, and currently we have right around 1,000 assignments within these 6 facilities. It's reduced right now because of COVID and social distancing. We annually do, like this year, we did about $40 million in sales. We are on track to make a profit of about $1.2 million. MNCOR Industries has not always ran as one kind of entity. Back in 1994, the state legislature passed a law that our industry program had to become financially self-sufficient. It used to receive a state general fund subsidy of about $6 million, a little bit over. And the legislature gave us 5 years to make ourselves self-sufficient. It was that, or they wanted to turn it over to a private entity to run. I have been in the Department of Corrections for about 33 years. I've been in this position for 2. Previously, I've been an assistant commissioner and the agency chief financial officer. So my money knowledge of this is high. So I have a lot of history around our prison industry program. So we actually became financially self-sufficient within 4 years, met that goal. At our peak in 2017, we actually had made a profit of about $5.6 million. And by law, we can reinvest that money into the agency. So we can reinvest it into capital equipment for our program. We can use that money to help pay for costs in the facilities. We can use that money for reentry and for education or things that are to the benefit of all the incarcerated population. We have 18 different product lines. We do sewing, so we make all the clothes and garments for all the facilities. We do mattresses and pillows. We have an upholstery shop. We have a very robust print program. We do subcontract work for several private businesses. We do the canteen for all the correctional facilities. We have a laundry operation that we serve our facilities, some colleges, our veterans' homes, the school for deaf and blind. We have a chemical line. We make PPE. Starting with COVID, we quickly got into the business of making barrier masks, gowns, face shields, not only to supply to our own facilities, but also to county jails. And then we eventually were able to make enough product to sell to the general public. I'm sure I'm missing some of our product lines, but yeah, we are very diverse for sure. We operate in 5 adult male facilities and then at our female facility. Our goal is, to me, it's not about the money. Of course, by law, we have to be self-sufficient, but it's about affording people some soft and technical skills for employment. Many people coming into prison maybe didn't have a real job, or the jobs they had weren't maybe sufficient to keep them employed or to manage their households or to give them a place to live, to make a good living wage. So we really focus on trying to teach those soft and technical skills. And that comes down to going to work every day, going to work on time, working well with others, dealing with direction and supervision, perhaps from your supervisor. And then we have some very technical programs like our print shop. They are certified. We have employers. We've had 2 different employers come into our facilities and interview gentlemen in our print shop, and they have jobs before they leave, because we are teaching on some equipment that is a little outdated in this digital age, but there are big print companies that still operate these pieces of equipment. So that's a successful program. We have recently started collaborating with our career tech or vocational tech, also known as, to have a more collaborative effort. So we have a carpentry program at one of our facilities, and at that same facility, we have a cabinet shop, a wood shop. So we're working with that education department that they get the educational component, and then they move over to our shop and learn how to do the hands-on with the equipment and everything. And we're also trying to come up with some more collaborations with that group. Kelly had mentioned a little bit about our bridge program. So we started this program about 5 or 6 years ago. And what it is guys who go to work police can't always find jobs right away. And especially some of those people who have been in for a very long time. So we employ, I think we have, it's up to maybe 25 people that work in our bridge location, which is in our central office. And they do some of the same type of work that we do in the prison, some of the subcontract type work. We also do paper fulfillment for the Department of Health and the Department of Natural Resources. So the Department of Health has hundreds and thousands of forms. And if hospitals or clinics need them, we take care of that distribution of those products. So the guys work in some of that and then doing some piecework, manufacturing type work in that program. The best part about our bridge program is they spend an hour a day in class. They are responsible to figure out how to get to work. So they live in halfway houses. A majority of them take the bus. A couple people will have cars. And then our employees work with them to get jobs. We have a computer lab to help them get jobs. And we also do teach them skills, resume writing, how to answer interview questions. How do you answer the question that you didn't have a job for 10 years? How do you answer that gap in employment question when you're out looking for a job? Right now, we have about a 97% placement rate out of that program. So very, very high placement rate. The average starting wage they're getting, last I heard, was about $18 an hour. Right now, my guess is they could probably be making a little bit more. Our unemployment rate here is super, super low. Everybody is looking for employees. We also used to have an employee program. So our employee program was one of the first in the nations to really start helping men and women while they were inside get ready to get out and get a job. And we had 6 people in that unit. And unfortunately, due to some bad budget years, we had to cut the program, and it's very, very sad. But providing services to these people. And so our staff would go out and reach out to employers, and then we would match employers to people being released from prisons. We would make sure they had bus cards, they had clothes for the job. If maybe it was construction, we'd get them steel-toed boots and get them a general set of tools. We've tried to work with some of the unions, like the construction unions and carpentry unions, to get people jobs. And then our staff would go out and follow up with the employer and the person on release after they started their job, just to make sure things were going okay. We've got a couple really good success stories. We have a woman that was released and ended up getting a job up near Fargo, North Dakota. And she came to one of our job fairs and hired 4 women on the spot. She's worked her way up through this company up to a manager. And so that's just super exciting. And our employee program was reducing recidivism. What does it say here? It was from 32 to 63%. So that's a pretty significant jump in that recidivism reduction. Employment is certainly a key when they get out to helping them be successful. I think I hit all my high points. Hopefully I didn't talk too fast, and I am definitely open for questions.
Thank you, Alicia. I will open the floor to questions. Anyone, committee member? Gentlemen? Who was first? Tracy. Go ahead, Tracy. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is, you talked a lot about the success of your programs and everything. And I also see that in 2013 that in Minnesota, ban the box became law. Do you think that this attributed to the success that you all have had? Considering that you have a lot of employers that come into your system to offer the former felons or incarcerated work, do you think that this was the stepping stone to that?
Mr. Chair Representative, I think that's a really good question. I can't say with certainty that it was a catalyst, but I will say it has definitely made a difference. I think the ban the box is incredibly important. I think everyone should be given an opportunity to go out and have a job. I think it's irresponsible for us to think that people getting out of prison cannot have changed. I think it's unfair to base maybe a decision, a really bad decision somebody made 15, 20 years ago, prevents them from being successful in the future. So I think the ban the box was incredibly important.
Thank you. And one other question, if you don't mind. I know it's going to be similar. So would you also say that attributes to a lesser recidivism rate?
Definitely having a job that you can support yourself decreases the risk for recidivism. And Kelly's nodding her head.
Thank you. Gentlemen, anyone else? Chairman Bain.
All right. Again, thank you for that information. I want to, about the program, you gave us a rate, a success rate, I guess, but of those that go out and get a job, how many of those are companies that you've contracted with, or they get somebody separate that you're not contracted with? How many of those go to your partners, so to speak?
Mr. Chair Representative, thank you for that question. I would say very few go to our partners. We have one partner that does hire, and they're in the Twin Cities metro area. A lot of our partners are not in the metro area though, so I don't see a lot of release people going directly to those business partners.
Okay. I've got another follow-up, and I may have heard this wrong. I turned 40, so I don't hear as well as I used to. What is self-sufficient? Elaborate on that self-sufficient status. What's that? Elaborate, if you could clarify that for me.
Absolutely. So we have to operate and not rely on any state funding. So we have to bring in enough revenue to pay for all of our employees and all the money that we pay to the incarcerated population that are in our program. And so that includes, I mean, we have to, anything we build, we have to be able to pay for all the materials. We have to pay for all of our capital equipment. Yeah, so we do that and typically have made a profit.
Thank you. Lisa, I want to ask you, what are your plans moving forward? We've discussed with our local workforce people and things that looking forward, what employers are looking for, you know, in the marketplace, and technology-based training, things of that nature. Y'all, what do y'all see on your horizon as far as meeting the needs of employers in Minnesota?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that question. Interestingly, and Kelly may have a little more information on this, our Department of Employment and Economic Development surveyed many, many employers, I want to say 2 years, maybe 3 years ago now. And the biggest thing they asked for is actually a reference. It isn't that they were looking for anything specific to a skill or anything technology based. It was more about having that kind of good employment reference. And we used to have a policy that did not even allow our staff to give a reference. So when I stepped into the position I'm in now, I got that policy changed right away, that staff can give an employment reference or a reference for a school or a college. And the policy used to prohibit incarcerated people from even reaching back to staff to ask for that. So that wasn't very effective for us, nor was it effective for those being released. So we got that policy changed so we can at least give that job reference, because we found out from employers that's what they were looking for. As it relates to what the Minnesota economy might be looking for, our program doesn't necessarily go to seek out to match that. That falls more into our career tech and our education department. They typically would do more of that on that vocational career tech side.
That would be independent of your responsibilities, what you're saying, as far as your department.
Correct.
Okay. Did you say earlier that all of your population in your program comes directly out of the halfway houses, and no, did I misunderstand that?
Yeah, so our operations in our 6 correctional facilities are the people specifically incarcerated in those facilities. Our bridge program, which is part of the, it's a job availability for those going into work release, typically between 20 and 30 people. Those are guys, men, it's just men also right now that are in halfway houses out in the community.
Thank you very much. I have a follow-up question from Chairman Bain.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. What I asked earlier about the people who matriculate through your system, when they get out and they find a job, or what is kind of the location? Are they going to various parts of Minnesota? Is there more? Do you have any data that suggests whether they're staying in central Minnesota or southern Minnesota, or is it pretty spread out among the state?
Mr. Chair, Representative, in Minnesota, people are typically released to the county that they came from. Okay. So we have 87 counties in Minnesota. And Kelly may have a better answer on this than I do too. And so typically they go back to the county that they probably live in, or that they would have that community support or a place to go. And I do not within our industry program track job data. Kelly, do you know if our research department tracks job data by region?
I apologize, I'm clicking the wrong unmute button. I can't say that they do, but we have the ability to. So Department of Corrections gets information as part of our data management system from our Employment and Economic State Agency on the unemployment insurance paid, so that we can see who is working, who's drawing legitimate income. So we have the ability to look at regionally. I don't have that data, however. I can say that it's about 70% of all people who are incarcerated are from like the Twin Cities metro 7-county area. So there's a high volume of people who are released to our Twin Cities metro area. And then the remaining 30% are in greater Minnesota, more rural kinds of areas.
Other questions from any of the committee members?
I have one, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, gentleman from Harrison.
Yes. I think this would be directed toward Ms. Heifert. What are the total number of transitional housing beds for the system, and how many are occupied roughly?
You know, I don't know that I have a general count. Again, because we pay for stay, and those could be mixed places. So we don't necessarily have dedicated beds in those halfway houses. I do know they have lots of vacancies, because as our population is down, it influences their population as well. Work release has been pretty steady, but we do see things ebbing and flowing. So they have open beds.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We appreciate both of y'all being available to us today. The information was very valuable to us, and we're going to reach out to y'all to get some paper from y'all. We can look at some stuff and look at your legislation. Thank you very much for your input today and your willingness to be a part of this committee hearing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, moving along, I believe Dr. Bradley come around, and you'll sit at the end of the table. We may have to clear out a seat or two down there so we can present. Okay, y'all both come forward and be sworn. I'm just kidding.
At any given time, we can have 5 minutes.
There's 600 people in the program.
Yes, probably at least that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley. I appreciate, and if you would introduce yourself and your colleague to the committee members and members of attendees, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Belcher, for giving us an opportunity to come this afternoon. My name is Cedric Bradley. I serve as the Vice President for the Harrison County campus of Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. And I have my colleague, Dr. Ladd Taylor, who serves as the Vice President of the Perkiston and George County Center at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College.
Thank you very much for coming today. And I believe that you're going to update us on a couple of things that y'all have going on since last year. And I believe including the fact that, and I want to congratulate you on your efforts and and the college's efforts on the Pell grant program that y'all put in place along with Holmes Community College. And if you could explain to the members how that's coming along and what y'all are moving forward on the current status of re-entry there at Gulf Coast.
Yes, sir. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. So Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, we serve a 4-county district. Those 4 counties include Harrison, Jackson, Stone, and George County. In Stone and George County, we also have the Stone and George County correctional facilities. We have been doing non-credit and adult education work at those facilities for several years. We've been very successful on the non-credit realm as well as adult education. And one of the things that we've always wanted to do, particularly when it comes to credit work, we've seen the success of our adult education. Those students, those incarcerated individuals, they were passing their GED and their high school equivalency at such a high rate. In most cases, that was at the 90th percentile for those individuals. So we wanted to see how could we leverage that and give those students or give those individuals an opportunity to earn credit work through Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. But there were two challenges to that for us. One, how would those students pay for the credit work? And two, we particularly wanted to offer career technical education to those individuals because we knew that that would be the best opportunity for those individuals once they are released to go and get a livable wage once they are released from prison. So around in 2019, the U.S. Department of Education began to solicit applications for higher ed institutions to apply to be part of what's called the Second Chance Pell experiment. This experiment, as Mr. Chairman just mentioned, this gives incarcerated individuals who are classified as state or federal inmates the opportunity to receive Pell grants while they are incarcerated. So we submitted an application to the U.S. Department of Education in 2019, a very extensive application process. We made it to round 2. We submitted and answered more questions for the U.S. Department of Education. And then around March 2020, we were notified that we were one of 130 higher ed institutions in the nation. This includes community colleges and universities to be selected to be part of the Second Chance Pell experiment. Gulf Coast Community College, as well as Holmes Community College, were the 2 Mississippi higher ed institutions to be selected. So that lets us know that our community colleges are doing a great job. So we were notified in March of 20, and we all know what also happened in March of 20. COVID happened. So it pushed our start date back to being able to offer courses in the correctional facilities further back than we would have wished for. But in spring of 21, this past spring, we did begin to offer credit courses at Stone and George County Regional Correctional Facilities. And even though we were doing this in the midst of COVID, COVID really helped us to be creative in our approach because we knew that it would be very difficult for us to get into the correctional facilities in a face-to-face setting. Dr. Taylor, working with Warren Brewer and Warren Fairley at those 2 correctional facilities, we were able to begin to offer credit courses via online. And so for the spring semester, as well as this summer semester, we've had about 30 incarcerated individuals to take credit academic courses through Gulf Coast Community College online. Those courses have included general psychology, technical English, as well as World Civilization 1. And you may ask the question, why the academic route right now? And it goes back to those first 2 challenges. Challenge number 1, how do we get the individuals to pay for their tuition? We're able to get past that challenge by the Second Chance Pell. Most of these individuals qualify for Pell grants. But the second challenge is, how do we stand up a career technical education program in the correctional facilities? Because these are very, very high cost programs that it takes a considerable amount of money to actually stand up the program, and then to continue to fund the program each year takes a considerable amount of money as well. But we wanted to have a short-term win. We wanted to have a short-term win to begin to offer these courses. So we went the academic route, and for any student, and this is not for just for Gulf Coast Community College, this is for any of our 15 community colleges, students that are working on their associate's degrees through any of our 15 community colleges, they also take, in order to get that associate's degree in that career technical field, they have to take 15 hours of academic courses. So the academic courses that we are offering to these incarcerated individuals are academic courses that will apply to any of the CTE programs that they wish to pursue once they are released. So once they are released, hopefully they're going to have 15 hours of credit underneath their belts. And if they choose to come to Gulf Coast Community College, which we hope they would do, they could apply those credits, and then they were just going, they would be going strictly into their career technical programs where they've already knocked out all of their academic courses. If they choose not to come to Gulf Coast Community College, those 15 credit hours of academic courses would apply to any of the other 15 community colleges in Mississippi as well. So trying to see if there's anything else. Dr. Taylor, do you have any?
Well, just to kind of reiterate on what Dr. Bradley said there. And if those students do not choose to come to Gulf Coast, or if they do rather choose to come to Gulf Coast and they go ahead and complete their career technical program degree, as you know, with the recent developments with the IHL, the 4 universities are accepting those career technical credits for a Bachelor of Applied Science. So in the past, once you got that career technical degree, your option was to go into the workforce. Now you have multiple options: go into the workforce, or you can go in and get your 4-year degree at a university, because they're accepting those credits now. So it gives more opportunities for the students, and in this case, the inmates.
And as part of the Second Chance Pell, the U.S. Department of Education, although they don't require, they strongly recommend that the individuals that we recruit to be part of the Second Chance Pell are within 5 years of release. And so those are the individuals that we really try to target, but it's not limited to the individuals who are within 5 years of release. Any student that qualifies for a Pell Grant could be part of the program. And one of the great things about Gulf Coast, and once again, going back to those short-term wins that we were trying to accomplish in the midst of COVID, we knew that we had an adult education program at the correctional facilities. We knew that this program was very successful, and we knew that we had a captured audience right there with those individuals that were getting their high school equivalency. So those were the first individuals that we began to target to be part of the Second Chance Pell. So they already had familiarity with Gulf Coast Community College. They were familiar with us. And so they were able to have an easy transition from that adult education high school equivalency to credit courses. And what we're doing now is we have, as I mentioned earlier, we've always had a presence for many years in those 2 correctional facilities. So we have adult education instructors at those correctional facilities, and those adult education instructors have, for lack of better words, they've sort of served as case managers, facilitators for these individuals that are going into the credit courses. That has been one challenge for us, because even though it's working right now, one of the things that's happening in this particular case is that it is pulling our adult education instructors from being able to basically do what they are there to do, which is to teach adult ed and to teach the high school equivalency. So they are finding themselves kind of having to do more work. And so that's one of the challenges that we're also trying to work through, trying to find someone that could basically serve as a case manager, facilitator for those 2 correctional facilities, where they can work with those incarcerated individuals to fill out their admissions application, to fill out their FAFSA, to navigate Canvas, to talk about how to take a proctored test via the online module that we have. So those are some of the things that we're working through. But so far, once again, this is a pretty new to Gulf Coast Community College in terms of the credit world. Started spring of 21, and we also had classes this summer. It has been highly successful. We've had about 30 inmates, as I mentioned earlier, to go through courses, and I'm happy to say that all of those individuals were retained, and all of those individuals passed those courses that they've taken over these first 2 semesters. And so I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and try to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Okay, and recognize any members for any questions at this time. Gentleman from Harrison.
Thank you, Dr. Bradley, and thank you for Dr. Taylor for taking your time to appear before us today. Can you tell us a little bit about what you envision as the case manager being that would go between Stone and George and help facilitate these programs and ensure their success, and approximately what the cost would be for that?
Yes, sir. And once again, we're always looking at short-term wins, Representative. And what that case manager would do, that case manager basically would help those inmates to navigate through the courses that they're taking, and they would be with those individuals from the initial entry process to Gulf Coast Community College until they have completed all the courses that they could take through Gulf Coast Community College. And with this short-term win, what we would envision would be this person would kind of serve both facilities. We could possibly have one person to serve both facilities. In an ideal world, we would have one person at each of the facilities. But if we only had one person to kind of rotate between the two facilities, maybe 2 days at one facility, 3 days at the other facility, we think that would be a great win. And it would the cost for that would probably be about $60,000.
Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Thank you, Doctor. You mentioned earlier that the program recommends that the inmates be within 5 years of release for participation. Are there any limits to participation in the program based on the type of crime the inmate may or may not have been convicted of?
And once again, there is no, to answer your question, no, sir. But the Department of Ed recommends that we try to pursue nonviolent offenders. And they have a definition for nonviolent offenders, and I don't know that right off the top of my head, but that's their recommendation. And I'll also add that even though we're part of a pilot right now with the Second Chance Pell, one of the first stimulus packages that was passed, I think in 2019, actually had language in it to begin to open that back up to where all incarcerated individuals will be eligible for Pell Grants. And what we're hoping to do at Gulf Coast Community College, because we already have our foot in the door and we're already working toward it, that we can kind of serve as a footprint for a blueprint for all the other community colleges that may decide to pursue this as well.
Okay, thank you. And that's great work you're doing down there.
Thank you.
It's going to benefit the state for many years, I think.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Gentleman from Tallahatchie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guess I have two questions. Are you familiar that the Mississippi Delta Community College has a program similar to the one that you all are doing?
We are, and actually, Dr. Jackson is a Gulf Coast Community College former employee, and we've had an opportunity to have some conversations with them as well. Yes, sir.
Okay. So my next question is, I've heard you say the short-term win term several times. How long does this program actually last, or do you have any knowledge of when it may last so that we can figure out what the long-term goal may become?
Yes, sir. That's a great question. And the answer is the Department of Ed does not have an end date for it. Basically, what they do each year is they basically say, we will continue the program. So they don't have an end date. So I guess really what maybe the best way to answer that is it's year to year, because we really don't know when they may cut it off. But it's not like we are part of the pilot for 5 years or we're part of the pilot for 3 years. It's basically a year to year. And so, for example, we've been doing a very similar pilot with dual credit, where dual credit students can get Pell Grants at Gulf Coast. And that pilot has been going on for 5 years. And basically what happens each year, we reach out to the U.S. Department of Ed and we say, will the pilot continue? And they say yes. So to answer the question, we don't have a specific end date. It's kind of at the leisure of the U.S. Department of Education. Yes, sir.
We certainly want it to continue. So we feel our best avenue in doing so is to continue to produce, success rates. Those 30 students that Dr. Bradley mentioned, all of them passed from World Civ to psychology to technical math and English. So that's, if they're looking for positive results to continue the program, we can provide that. I want to kind of mention the support that we've got from the two wardens.
I want to make sure that everyone in here understands that it would have been a lot more difficult job for Dr. Bradley and myself had we not had the support from Warden Fairley and Warden Brewer. They realized the recidivism reduction that this could bring, and they also realized just the environment within the institution. The result would be much more positive, and the morale would increase, and maybe less conduct issues by having an academic program on site. So it's been tremendous to have their support.
Thank you. Chairman Finnegan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Bradley. Question, I know you said that the Pell Grant is what primarily is funding, I guess, like the student costs. My curiosity is, does it cover the entire student cost or per hour cost, or however you define that? And if not, how much extra is the state paying for that?
Yes, sir. Students they qualify for a certain amount of Pell Grant, and that could vary depending on income and all of those things. Obviously, these students don't have income, so most of them are going to qualify for a full Pell Grant. And right now, most of those students have decided not to take more than 2 courses. And so we haven't run into a situation where the students, their Pell Grant would not cover the entire cost of it. But I will say they are not eligible for any type of refund. That Pell Grant, they're only, if the Pell Grant is $2,000 and tuition is $1,500, they don't get a $500 refund. They only can get the amount that's needed to cover tuition, books, and any fees that may be associated with the course.
So what's the cost to the state, if any? You said it's to set up one of these programs, the equipment and all is extremely expensive, I would assume. Did that get budgeted in with the cost of the Pell Grant? Or are there dollars that the state has expended to help set the programs up?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I apologize.
No, the cost of setting up your program, is it covered also by the tuition and the Pell Grants? Or if not, how much does your program cost the state of Mississippi?
Well, the Pell Grant piece it only covers the students' tuition costs. And for these students are actually, for example, they may be since it's online, they may be in an instructor's class at the Harrison County campus. They may be taking that course. So it doesn't pay for the cost that we would need to stand up a program. And I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I apologize.
Yeah, somewhat. So tell us the cost of standing up the program. I'm just curious as to what is the cost of the state of Mississippi of these programs, which I think are wonderful and we all support, but we need to know the cost of them.
Well. The cost for a CTE program, to start a CTE program?
In a prison, yes.
Right.
Well, and you're talking about the Second Chance Pell, and the beauty of the Second Chance Pell and the nature that it is right now, it is all academic courses. So there's not a whole lot of equipment that we need as you would need with a career and technical program. So there's little to no, all we've got to pay is the instructor, as Dr. Bradley mentioned. So the startup costs in the case of George County and Stone, they have computers readily available. Now, working with the wardens with what they can do on their requirements with students online, we were able to go in and use a particular software to make sure that they could have only access to you heard Dr. Bradley mention Canvas. That's basically the avenue to which our students go online to access their classwork. And so the startup would really just be paying that instructor because, like Dr. Bradley said, they're taking online classes. But if we were to move this, and we would love to do that in the future, move this to offering career technical programs so they could apply their Pell towards that, so they could learn a trade that would be credit on the credit side of the house, then you would be looking at startup costs in that area, and which be much more significant than it would be now with just academic courses.
Okay, I think you answered my question. I was under the impression not only were you doing educational courses, but you were also doing career technical type programs. And what I'm hearing you saying is that you're not there yet.
No, sir, we are not offering any career technical programs right now. And just an example of what the cost for a career technical program would cost. If we wanted to start a welding program, it would cost about $450,000 one-time cost, and then about $130,000 annual cost for equipment and supplies and all of those things.
Gotcha.
Now at those, I'm sorry, at those two institutions, we are also offering basic non-credit courses. Like at Stone County, we have pipe fitting, building trades, and of course, Dr. Bradley mentioned basic skills. And then we had the George County Center, we're going to be implementing building trades coming soon, but those are on the non-credit side.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Have any other questions from any other members? Thanks, fellas, both y'all coming up today. I know this is important to y'all. I've met with y'all before, and y'all are doing a very good job moving this forward. And hopefully we're going to be able to expand this and moving forward, and we can get this conjunction with the Department of Corrections. We make this work on the technical accredited side. Hopefully we're going to be able to do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter will be Commissioner Kane, and he's got his entourage with him today. He's got a number of people with him. I believe, Commissioner, who's going to present update on reentry at this time? Gary, or it's going to be you, or you going to? Okay. Okay, good deal. Good deal. For the members and the audience that did not recognize Commissioner Kane, he's Chair of Corrections, and they will go forward. They want to present, I believe, have a presentation pertaining to reentry and programming. Is that correct, Commissioner? Thank you very much. We appreciate y'all being here today. Thank you very much. You're gonna have to get the mic on, I think.
Very much. Can you hear me okay? Yeah.
That's better.
I'm Burl Kane. It's an honor to be here with you today. We're talking about our reentry programs. And if you back up to the one we just had, is the basis for all our reentry, and that was our inmate-led churches and seminars. We can't leave that out because that's what's producing most of our teachers. And we have those operating now. There's 25 different churches with inmate pastors. And these are the way we're getting rid of the gangs, because people are joining these churches and being involved with these, and gang population has diminished significantly already. And so we're really moving forward with that. We can't have prison until we get rid of the gangs and run our prison ourselves and not let them run our prison. So we think now that we're down to probably 1,500 gang members. We've got it down to 500 to 50 leaders, and we have targets on them. So we're going to be working on them more. We were at 6,000. So that's a lot of hard work by a lot of good corrections folks and so forth to cut that out. So now then, the reentry, and I want to thank you for the $3 million you gave us extra, because we've almost spent it. And we're going to, so we're going to need some more. But anyway.
Just ask for more. We'll get it to you. Don't worry about it.
Okay, good. So let's go ahead from reentry programming. The number of reentry programs we have now, it's the three major prisons. That'd be the next slide. If y'all can turn to that one. It's going to be, that's backward. Let's go the other direction. That's going to be 24 of them at Central Mississippi. There's 25 at Mississippi State Penn and 20 at South Mississippi. Now I have a handout to go with that. And Carrie, you might can help us, or Jay, get this passed out to each one of them. That's where all the schools and programs we have. There was too many to list here, but not near as many as we're gonna have. Okay, let's go to the number of reentry programs. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Reentry expansion projects, and that's an example of some of them, and that's talking about the money. If you look at the bottom, you'll see fiscal year 21, 166,000 we spent, but 22 we have committed and out there $3,093,000. An additional 1.5 million allotted for reentry simulators and equipment. Now, the thing is, we realize that skills and trades are really the answer along with morality. If you don't have the morality, you just make smarter criminals. And so we don't want to do that. We want to change them inside. So let's take an example. The next slide is going to show you what these simulators are. And so you'll have a plumbing trailer, automotive, heavy equipment, and you see the seat on the heavy equipment in the middle, and you see the little lights on the side. That's like a bulldozer. And he'd be driving that bulldozer or track hoe, what have you. The next one is a commercial or CDL license, which is like a truck seat, where you sit there and you actually shift, you drive, you do the clutch, and you learn how to drive the truck. Now, what you do is we're getting these, and they're installed in trailers, 18-wheeler trailers, 55-foot long. And so we'll be able to move those trailers to different locations and use the simulators. That'll follow up with the actual welding. And this is a welding simulator. And see, it's actually working as a welding machine. So he really gets the feel, and then it critiques how he operated it. And it critiques, are you a dirt job or welder, which is terrible, or did you really lay a fine bead, and how you need to do it and so forth. So it teaches how to do it. So that's essential that we have those. Now that thing is very pricey. We're going to show you the price, I think, on the next one. And so we have a trailer that will have 8 of those in it. An example is we want to be sure we have one. We have an obligation to the Washington County for the women that we have up there. We wanted to put one of the trailers there. It would be there for a period of time. Then it would move on to Marshall, and that's a new prison that we're taking over at this time and working to do that. The trailers would have 8 welding simulators in it. Now, you also can have the trailers with other simulators. So we're using simulators to get more bang for the buck as far as reaching more people. When you look at the number of people in the regionals, the number of people we have that's 2 years or 3 years short, which is what we will focus on, those short guys, then we will we'll have to have a lot of equipment to cover all that. So that's where we are with our reentry program as far as skills and trades and so forth. But let's go to the next slide, because this is just as important. And you're going to see Walnut Grove. But what we're going to talk about there is the alcohol and drug addiction program. That program is a state-of-the-art program like we don't see anywhere except on the street, never in prison, because it's pretty pricey. But they're going to train us and our mental health folks how to do this program, particular program. We'll start with 35 inmates at Walnut Grove in one zone. It'll be self-contained. And so we're going to deal heavy-handed with addiction, because that's a major problem. And so that program we hope will be successful. There'll be 45 days in the program. Then they go to aftercare. And then we'll have a next 35. And we plan to do this for 6 months to do 105. That's all we can afford at that point. Then we'll move into doing it ourselves and won't be contracting it out to that group, the Palmetto group, that is one of the premier addiction places. You send your folks if you really want to whip it. So that's what we have there. Now let's go next. You want to ask any questions as we go along?
Go and do your presentation. We'll open the floor for questions.
Then we go to community work centers. Let's go there. And Nathan Blevins is over community corrections, so I have him, and he's going to make a small presentation here. So Nathan.
Thank you, Nathan. You can move forward.
All right, thanks for having me. Right now, since I got appointed in January, my main focus is making sure that, it's not on.
Get close to it.
What we're doing, basically, we've been evaluating our transitional housing, CWCs and transitional housing to make sure we're getting what we're supposed to be getting. Okay, so that's mainly what I've been doing since January. So in doing that, I've kind of discovered that there wasn't much programming going on in these places. So that's what we're doing now with the transitional housing. As you know, that's most of those folks are people who are paroled, or don't have an address. Okay, so what I didn't want to happen with me having an extensive law enforcement background is to turn these places into dumping grounds. where people just walk off and they're not getting the training that they need. So we're working with the parole board on a number of issues and making sure we're getting lists and evaluating them to determine who really need to go to these places. So that's pretty much the gist of the transitional center. So if anyone have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them.
Tell me, Nathan, as far as the transitional housing, you're not at capacity, are you, at this time?
No, sir, we're not. As a matter of fact, our transitional housing, the capacity right now is about 186. Population is 115. We're running about 71 vacancies.
And can you tell us, the committee members, why we're running low on the transitional housing?
I can't speak for the past administration. I can speak from when I took over in January. COVID was a big issue. You know, we stopped movement for a while, but since we've opened back up, the numbers are starting to increase.
Okay. Now, we authorized 800, I believe, 2 years ago, maybe, or last year, increased. Do y'all have any plans to expand once you fill these beds up, move forward on the transitional housing to increase that number to start reaching toward that 800 bed? Or is that a money problem?
Well, I can just tell you, and Commissioner May can speak to that, but I can just tell you it's a lot of interest. I get a lot of phone calls, emails with people wanting to open transitional housing. And I think after the passage of this parole law, there's going to be more people paroled. And as a result of that, you're going to have more people paroled without addresses. So I think with this pattern, there probably will be a need for more beds. And I don't think it'll be an issue filling the beds that we currently have.
Let me comment a little bit on the vacancy. These same inmates are the ones the sheriffs compete for. So we had limited movement and we wanted to keep the sheriff supplied as much as we could rather than over here. So that was a competition. That's one reason for the low vacancy rate in the transitional houses, and also the CWCs as well, which he has a list of those beds. How many are they? Did you read that yet?
CWC, the capacity is 845, population is about 409. So the vacancy is about 436 in your CWCs.
So that's the same problem with that. We need the beds, so we want to fill them up because we'll need them once the sheriff starts sending us more people, but we're not sure because we do anticipate that the new legislation would probably make 1,500 at least eligible. We all know the numbers. So we're going to see a lot of people, I think, move out and have some space.
And since, I guess the last number that I've got that were inmates that were paroled that didn't have qualified address was around 580. Has that increased in the last 2 or 3 months, or has it decreased? Something like it was 585. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's some reason that number's sticking in my head. Do y'all have a number on how many inmates?
Mr. Pickett's in the back. He might know better than us, but we don't know the number right off the bat.
Chairman Pickett, you're not a presenter today. I appreciate you coming today. You have any idea what that number is as we sit here today? 350. Do we have a plan to provide some type of transition? I shouldn't say transition, but getting with the parole board on how we're going to move those individuals so we can eliminate the possibility of ourselves getting some trouble with some folks in Washington on that matter.
Yes, sir. There's been more communication with the parole board. We've requested weekly lists. As a matter of fact, I think we got a meeting tomorrow where I'm sure we'll discuss some more of this stuff. I think everybody realizes now we all got to come to the table to try to figure out how we're going to continue to keep these beds filled.
What do y'all think about a voucher system? You know, a lot of these inmates that are coming up that have been incarcerated, some of them going to be 35 years and they're going to have a parole date now. So they don't have any parents still living, a lot of them. They don't have brothers and sisters. Most of them, any family they have, be nieces and nephews, things of that nature that they really don't, some of them they don't know. But is it possible we could introduce legislation that would include a voucher system where individuals out in the community that may be kin to these individuals could be paid a voucher to house them for a short period of time 18 months, a year to 18 months, so we could get them out. Have y'all looked at that, or is that something that we need to discuss moving forward?
We need to look at that and spend some time looking at it, but the main thing is we need to stop releasing people with no addresses. So what we're doing is we're attacking that with a vengeance so that we find an address somewhere, someplace for everybody that goes before the parole board. So we're working close with Mr. Pickett on that and just to stop this problem. It's an uncommon problem to me, and so we need to find a place for these others to go, but probation pro really needs to hustle and find, and also we do, and let's find an address for them and find a place to go. You need to have somewhere to live, so that's what we're gonna do.
Can you tell me what it costs, transitional housing? What is the budget for those?
I have to ask Carrie. I don't know exactly. Do you know Carrie? This is Carrie McDonald with us.
Okay. Do we contract that per Minnesota? Folks in Minnesota, they indicated that they did it as occupied. Do we have a contract for bed space, or do we have a contract for as occupied?
I think that we have a contract with Morehouse, those kind of places like that, and I think we pay $17 to $20 a day for them to keep the inmates. That's one thing we're going to evaluate, because their job is to get them a job, and they're supposed to stay with them a certain amount of time, and by that time they should have them a job. Now, what we're doing, all the folks that's holding inmates, that way we're evaluating their success rate, because we don't want to pay them the money and then keep them and just house them and don't get them a job. They need to successfully find them somewhere to go. So they're getting a good hard look now, and we have a list of places like that if you're interested. And I think it may be on the sheet we passed out.
Thank you. Chairman Barnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner, wouldn't you agree that when we talk about releasing these individuals to transitional housing or trying to find them an address to be released from, would you agree that that time frame needs to be extended? I think we should look at maybe 6 to 9 months of these individuals having that type of environment, because I don't think that just releasing them for 2 to 3 months and then releasing them there for back into the community is going to be beneficial. If we're trying to help them find a job, if we're trying to continue to help them with drug or even alcohol or related issues. So shouldn't we be looking at maybe somewhere along the 6 to 9 months time frame, i.e. to continue to help them get the help that they need, and to also be able to find employment, perhaps save some money so that they can find a permanent residence somewhere?
Senator, you're right. It probably would help. And if you look at the next slide we had, is with things, our reentry needs. And one of the things is we hope to reduce this number, because we intend for those reentry skills and trade jobs to be functioning, and for us to not release people that don't have anywhere to go. We want to have them equipped well enough that somebody wants to hire them, and they can get a job. And the whole goal is to do that and focus 100% on everybody getting out of our prison, have a skill and a trade, and then him being able to get a job. And then we solved our problem. Our job is to do that. So that's where we really gonna focus. And that's what we're doing now. And if we back up to even 2 years, everybody 2 years short with these simulators and this kind of equipment, and we test him to see what his aptitude is for what he wants to do or should want to do. He just don't know it, like the military would do, and put him in that skill and trade. We want him to get a job. And that's why we have our churches to inspire them. Let's get straight, get morally right. Let's change our lives and get out and not hurt anybody and be successful and have less victims of violent crime. The reentry program is what we should have been doing for years. And that's why you really got to have us with the court reentry program, because that as well is effective in keeping people not having to do a 10-year sentence, but do a 2-year sentence, because you learn the skill in a trade, you have a job, you get back out, you change the probation instead of the long sentence, and then you go to be a productive citizen. And it's to save people from getting in prison and staying all this time and corrupt, what have you, 10 or 15 years. We can cut it short if they're nonviolent. And so this year, I really hope we can work to get our reentry court going. That's the program that I started at Angola, the only one in the country. We saw it work. There's research with it. That's why they didn't have one in Minnesota. It's not up there yet. But if we do it well here, it'll go everywhere. And that's the good thing about Mississippi. We really can get out in front in a lot of these programs if we'll just come on and do it. And that's what we want to do. I want them to have a job. That's the way I feel about it.
Gentleman from Lafayette.
Is Michael? So I can't help but think of all those houses you have inside and outside the gates of Parchment as we're talking about simulators. There's a couple dozen houses that are in disrepair that in the past have been used for correction officers, which we have a shortage of correction officers anyway. And you're talking about purchasing simulators for plumbing, electrical, roofing. We've got that right there inside and outside the gates. It needs to be repaired. So why not use some of those houses for training? All of those houses either for the housing of corrections officers or halfway houses for those that are in their last year of their time there.
You're right on track with us. Our commitment is that 10 of those houses are going to be restored this year, and we'll move right on up. And the crews are being set up now to do that. It's just the COVID thing blocked us off, and I don't want to use that excuse, but we planned that. The 10 will get repaired this year. You're right. That's what we do, fix our own cars and teach people ASE certification. And so build our houses, teach carpentry, teach plumbing with the house. You're right, and we're doing that.
Did you gather a cost on just the materials only cost on repairing those 10 houses or more? I think it's more than 10, right?
It was about $250,000 for the materials. It was about $25,000 a piece. Some of them were pretty deteriorated, but also we looked at another thing. We have a shortage, and we met with several legislators from that area 3 weeks ago. Part of the reason we need to use those houses maybe as officer quarters, where you have 3 bedrooms and 3 officers could live there, and you could have a kitchen and provide housing for them. If we had an emergency, then we have a force right there with us. And so we need to be using them for what somebody intended 25 or 30 years ago and let them deteriorate and fall apart. That was a good idea then, it's a good idea now. So that's why we want the houses all restored, because we want to use the houses to have people there, not maybe as much as family units, but having housing for our officers that could come and stay 2 nights, finish his shift, and another one take his place and use it almost like a motel. That was one of our ideas too. At Angola, we have a motel that we work like a motel with about 60 beds. So we keep our force there and we don't have the employment problems you have here. But since we have the houses, let's start with that. And so use the resources we have. So you're right, we're right on top of that.
One more question. The plumbing simulator, so to repair these 10 houses, we're looking at $250,000 in materials cost and hands-on training for those that are going to get involved in repairing those houses, which is a simulator in itself. So I'm just trying to compare where the money would be the best spent. How much is that plumbing simulator apparatus?
Well, here's why the simulator. The simulator, it's moved. That's why it's on a trailer. We still have the regionals. We don't want to forget them either. So we have so many places to use that it wouldn't stay where it'll go there and stay maybe a month or 2 months, teach those and move to another place. Then they'll have welding machines there to actually practice on once they learn how to do it and the theory behind it. Then they can do the welding machine, makes a circle. It'll be back at some point. We got to do CMCF, the women there. That's one thing we were focusing on was females in the welding, because we have welding shops and all over the prisons and places that we could use, but not for the female. Also the forklift driver. So that's why the simulators, because we have so many areas to cover. That's what we're doing.
Jim.
Thank you, Commissioner. So it's my understanding that those offenders convicted of sexual offenses are not allowed to participate in the transitional housing. If that's the truth, what is the department's reentry plan for that subset of offenders that are precluded from that reentry plan?
That's the hardest question I'm gonna get asked today. So that is a big one. We talk about that though. We were just brainstorming jobs that sex offenders could do. And we thought about the truck drivers, you know, local within state, the concrete truck industry, they need drivers. So that's why the simulator for the CDL license, but jobs that don't really interact in the public, you know, he's not gonna work at McDonald's, he can't get a job there. And so we're just really searching our soul where to find employment places for them because they need a job too. So we're on top of that. We just don't know the answer.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, y'all can move forward with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, that's it. We want to show you that pretty picture of Parchment.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other questions for either Nathan or the commissioner pertaining to any of the current reentry program that they have going on right now? We appreciate y'all coming. Look forward to working with the reentry court legislation this year. Hopefully we'll get that through both chambers and onto the governor's desk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got to go. Okay, our next presenter, Alicia Netterville, present. Yeah. Okay, let's come back to order. We got 3 more presenters. I think they're going to be relatively short. And we will we'll go forward. You leaving? Thank y'all. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Alicia, you can introduce yourself and you can begin your presentation for purposes of the committee hearing. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Alicia Netterville, and I'm the Deputy Director in Policy Council with the ACLU of Mississippi. Thank you, Chairman Horan, Burnett, Bain, and Fillingane for allowing me to testify today on the barriers of reentry and to offer some policy considerations to promote successful community reintegration. My testimony is informed by working with my fellow criminal justice reform advocates and reentry organizations working on the ground to help people reintegrate. I've also spoken with criminal justice impacted persons and formerly incarcerated persons who have navigated their way through reentry and have faced some or all of the barriers I will speak on today. I hope that these individuals and organizations will have an opportunity to be heard at these hearings because their experiences and their work will directly inform us on policy, and the policies that are developed will have a direct impact on their work and their lives. First, I would like to note that most all incarcerated persons will eventually return to their communities. That is why the state must advance policies to remove barriers that prevent successful reintegration. Recidivism not only harms returning persons, it also harms their families and society in general, as taxpayers foot the bill for a broken system that sets up returning persons for failure and places our state at risk of DOJ litigation that could cost our state millions of dollars. Now, it is indeed good news that some Mississippians will return home because of our recent parole reforms. But we must remember that returning persons may have served prolonged periods of incarceration. And it is natural for returning persons to face long-term challenges and adjustments, even if they have received services during incarceration. That is why we must enact policies and programs to prevent failure and reincarceration at every single stage of reentry. And that is during incarceration, at near release, and when individuals are permanently reintegrating back into their communities. Now, reentry is indeed a byproduct of one's incarceration. So basically, every experience while in the judicial and correctional systems will have some nexus to a person's reintegration into their community, be it good or bad. But in order to better inform the necessary policies, we have to look at reentry beyond the walls of our correctional facilities, beyond the walls of our prison industries, and beyond the walls of our jails. Keeping in mind that reentry involves a lot of moving parts and is influenced by multiple systems, I would like to respectfully offer some brief policy considerations for barriers faced by persons during the most permanent phase of reentry when they are no longer under the control and custody of our correctional systems. Because punishment should not be perpetual for formerly incarcerated persons, for their families, for community members, and for taxpayers. Reentry professionals and returning persons identify obstacles in 6 areas of basic needs, and we're talking about basic needs: livelihood, residence, family, health, criminal justice compliance, and social connections. Now, while many of these are interconnected, for the sake of time, I'll briefly touch on livelihood and residence. But first, I must talk about expungements. If the intent to approach reentry is from the position of second chances, we will have to revisit our current expungement laws. Research overwhelmingly shows that criminal records are the gateway to significant barriers to employment, housing, and other opportunities. Effective expungement policies can indeed attack many reentry barriers at the same time, and it can also prevent some barriers from even arising. I'm a lawyer, and I dedicate my pro bono hours to helping individuals determine whether or not they're eligible for expungement and to complete their petitions and proposed orders for expungement. I have never sat down with a client that did not tell me that if they could just get this off their record, they could get a job, or they could get a better job, or they could get safer housing. And it is heartbreaking to tell someone who has something on their record from 20 years and they just want to get a job that I cannot help them because their offense is not expungible. Now, I know that some believe that expungement of criminal records poses safety risks, but that's not true. Actually, it's the factors that are exacerbated by the criminal record, like unemployment and housing instability, that poses those risks. So in short, solid expungement policies can and should be used to address barriers to reentry. In terms of livelihood, I think we all know that low employment rates are closely related to high recidivism rates. Returning persons identify employment as one of the most important factors to avoiding further involvement with the criminal legal system. As lawmakers, there are ways to reduce the barriers faced by returning persons in the labor market. For example, during this more permanent phase of reentry, when corrections and prison industries are no longer involved, engaging non-correctional intermediary agencies and organizations has proven successful. These organizations help link individuals with employers who are willing to hire formerly incarcerated persons. Intermediary agencies and organizations can also provide case management services, substance abuse treatment, educational training, assistance with documentation for employment, paid transitional work experience, and post-employment support like mentorship and transportation. And this is a safety net for people who were not able to receive services while they were incarcerated, or even people who need an extension of the services they received while they were incarcerated. Employers can also be incentivized to hire returning persons and also provide on-the-job support with targeted tax credits and employer-specific training. And I do want to add that all employment for formerly incarcerated persons does not have to be low-wage manual labor. Additionally, in terms of livelihood, we have to look at criminal justice debt. Research shows that criminal justice debt, like fines and fees, are serious barriers to reentry. For instance, fines and fees are imposed without consideration for a person's ability to pay. The one known fact at the time when these fines and fees are imposed is that the person cannot pay because they're on their way to incarceration. And this causes returning persons to leave incarceration with lingering debt. Adding to that, returning persons are required to complete all the terms of their conviction, including paying off their criminal justice debt, before they can seek to have their records expunged, again, prolonging their successful reentry into society. Lastly, with regard to livelihood, although debtor's prison is illegal, some individuals right here in Mississippi who should be released are held captive and forced to work off fines in what are called restitution centers. These individuals are employed, but do not receive their wages. And due to inadequate accounting practices of these centers, individuals say they see no end in sight to this forced slave labor, thus prolonging reintegration back into society. Restitution centers should be abolished. So the best solution to this criminal justice debt would be to end the practice altogether. But these burdens could also be eased through policies that forgive fines and fees under certain circumstances when people are transitioning back into the community. In terms of residents, acquiring housing at this last phase is very challenging as well. Most individuals will face housing problems the moment they walk out of prison doors. And while there are many contributing factors to the housing issue, discrimination against persons returning is real and can prevent one from acquiring housing for many years after release. Ideally, landlords should not initially inquire about arresting criminal history, but in the alternatives, policies to address housing discrimination against formerly incarcerated persons can allow landlords to still consider a person's criminal history, but in a fair and just manner. For example, policy should require that consideration be given to the severity of the offense, the amount of time since the offense occurred, and the amount of time since an individual's release. Now, as I said, these are just a few examples that people face on the very back end of their reintegration during that long-term phase where they're trying to permanently become productive citizens. So it's in no way intended to be exhaustive, nor are my policy recommendations. They're at a very high level. So in closing though, I would like to reiterate that there is an undisputed connection between a person's experience during incarceration and their success at reentry. While reentry is not confined to the walls of our correctional facilities, prison industries, and jails, I think it is important to remember that they do play a very significant role. It is indeed their responsibility to release people who have been under their custody and control back into communities safely and rehabilitated. In the words of James Baldwin, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed if it is not faced. So to engage in any real reentry, we have to face whether our current correctional policies and practices are indeed pro-reentry. We have to face the vestiges of our past that outdate most all of us in this room, but are still being practiced in our correctional systems. Otherwise, there is no clear path to successful reentry. So I would like to leave you with some questions that we will all have to face. Are slave plantation models of incarceration really pro-reentry? For instance, does it really benefit incarcerated persons to work on prison plantations and pig farms if they have no desire or future in agriculture? Are practices like convict leasing and modern day sharecropping couched as work release really pro-reentry? Is stripping away a person's right to vote pro-reentry, or does it further connect them from members of their own community? Is piling debt in the form of fines and fees upon a person during incarceration pro-reentry? Is labeling incarcerated persons immoral pro-reentry? What would we have potential employers to think about returning persons? Lastly, is forcing a person to practice a religion or denomination to which they do not subscribe except through coercion pro-reentry? Again, Chairman, I thank you for the invitation, and I thank all of you for the opportunity to testify before you today. And I look forward to working with each of you on the issue of reentry.
Thank you, Ms. Netterville. Anyone have any questions, Ms. Netterville? Gentleman from Harris.
Thank you for appearing, Ms. Netterville. Appreciate your time. Can you restate what you said about restitution? I thought I heard you say that there should be no restitution, but perhaps I misunderstood.
Oh, no, that is not what I said at all. There should be. I am not anti-restitution. I'm anti-restitution centers in their current practice. So just for the sake of clarity, I will read what I said about that. Or I can just briefly tell you about restitution centers. So we have 4 or 5 restitution centers across the state of Mississippi that are under the purview of the Mississippi Department of Corrections. And in those restitution centers, people are supposed to be working to pay restitution, but if you look at their court orders, they are sentenced to these restitution centers to pay off fines, which is debtor's prison. But when they go to the restitution centers helps find them a job, but they cut an agreement with the employer to have that incarcerated person's check go directly to the restitution center. And the restitution center gives them an allotment of maybe $10 to buy things out of the commissary, to pay for their basic needs. They take transportation out of their check to take them to the job. And they also do not give them a proper accounting of how their money is spent. So we don't know if the restitution is being paid or not. What we do know is that people are being held in these restitution centers for extended periods of time, not to just pay off restitution, but to pay the restitution center to live there and to pay whatever else the restitution center deems sufficient for them to pay. So currently the number is very low of individuals that are in restitution centers because of COVID, but these restitution centers and this practice, according to everything that we've heard today, is definitely not pro-reentry if the goal is to allow people to work and have some responsibility for managing their finances and paying the restitution that they owe to people that they have harmed.
Ms. Netterville, if I can follow up on that for just a second on restitution centers, do you have any idea, and you may not, and DOC may have a better idea, how many do we have in restitution centers right now? How many people?
At last count, there were less than 20 people in the restitution centers.
Because I practice criminal law and do a lot of it, and I can't remember the last time I put someone in the restitution center, but I do share your sentiments that a lot of times, I know my judges quit doing it because people would go in actually owing more than what they did when they went into the restitution center. So I do understand what you're saying there. Are you proposing to do away with restitution centers? How do we make that up to the victims then, just through the traditional means of that being a part of their probation or sentence?
Yes, and allow individuals to pay their own restitution. The restitution centers, we have no proof that they're paying the restitution anyway. If they were paying the restitution, then people wouldn't come out of these restitution centers upside down. They would be working towards paying that restitution off. So the restitution centers are definitely not the way to go to make sure that people pay their restitution. And it actually takes away money that people could pay towards their restitution, because in court orders I have seen where people are sentenced to restitution centers to pay fines, not restitution.
Would you be opposed to some type of hybrid program, I guess, sort of like what Minnesota was talking about, doing a program where someone is in a reentry program, they're hired through a private contractor, and a portion of that money of which they're being paid is set aside for a victim?
No, I have no objection to that. It actually will help individuals when they're actually released. It will take some of the debt away so when they're released, they don't have that burden.
Thank you, Ms. Netterville. Any other questions? We appreciate your presentation, and we'll take your policy and considerations into account when we get ready for legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Bradley Lum with Mississippi Prison Industries, and he will be presenting, I believe you're going to update us and also give us some information about what you got, what your plans are moving forward. Is that a fair statement? Yes. Thank you very much. Introduce yourself and you can move forward with your presentation at your leisure.
Sure we're on. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Loud enough?
Yes, I think so.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, Chairman Horan and Chairman Bain and Chairman Barnett, to be here to speak to you guys today. You know, I think the overwhelming, thread of the conversation that we've had today is that we got to do reentry better. And when I talked to, Commissioner Kane, I'll say this. We've only known each other for about 6 months, but there's one common denominator that he and I both have. We were blessed with the gene to fix things. And what we like to do a lot of times is talk about how we can make things better. And so what you heard from him today, my job in the subset of the population that I oversee at Prison Industries is to create a continuation, to create a pathway that leads to even a lot of the things that Ms. Netterville was just speaking to, that leads to true long-term community integration. And I think that at the end of the day, if you as a body believe in long-term integration that reduces recidivism, then what we have to be about is ensuring job opportunities for our inmate population. That's what we have to be about across the board. We've got to be doing everything we can to center people on getting a job and keeping that job. I don't think that's any, look, when we talk about the success in society, people that have a job tend to realize success in their life, right? I think we can all agree to that. And so for us, when we look at our prison population, we look at it and say, okay, for MPIC and for the workers that we have at MPIC, what are we doing to prepare them for a real life, for a real job? When they walk out of the gate of the prison, what are we doing to put them in a position where the rubber hits the road? We're putting them, in a position to be successful, for a long time. So I had a speech that I had thought through, and I was going to read, and I was going to go through all these things, and it was going to be eloquent, and I was going to wow you. And as I've been listening to all the folks that have spoken today, I've kind of pulled back from that, because I think at the end of the day, we need to get to the root of the issue. And so I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing at MPIC and how we think and what we've seen, the things that we have to implement as an organization to ensure that we are realizing long-term success. So I've got Dante Jones here. Dante is our Central Mississippi Staff Coordinator for the Hope Alliance, which we're going to talk about in just a second, really our reentry initiative as part of MPIC. And then also CC Stringer, who was a long time incarcerated inmate with the Department of Corrections, worked for MPIC, and is now the head of our logistics and warehousing operation at MPIC. So we want to practice what we preach. If we talk about preparing folks for jobs, we will also make sure we're not only hiring those or putting people in jobs that they can get and careers they can keep, but also hiring those folks on our own staff. And so we've done that. And certainly she's a testament to that. So she's going to give a testimony after I finish to conclude today, to give you an idea of kind of what her thoughts are on this process. So one thing that I want to make sure that we're clear about, at the end of the day, if we are not about getting jobs or putting our inmate population in a position to get jobs, the cycle will continue. We'll be talking about this in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and 50 years. The cycle will always continue if we're not preparing, because ultimately a job is what leverages you into all other successful aspects of your life. All right. If you can, if you're, and look, to Ms. Netterville's point, the reality of getting a job is we've got to be preparing our folks for jobs of the 21st century and beyond. We got to be putting them in a position where they can go into a warehouse and run a forklift and then grow in their career at that organization, right? We've got to be putting them in a position where they can use a welding torch, go to Ingalls and make $100,000 in 5 years, right? We don't need to put people in a position where it's going to lead them back to some of the habits, the old habits and the old friends that they were involved with that put them in that place in the first place. So everything that we do is about putting people in a position to be successful and to move forward. Several points I want to make if we don't do that. One, our inmate population will continue to recidivate. We will continue to place a tremendous burden on our state resources. Communities will continue to suffer the consequences of our broken system. And I think that's probably as more important than anything. When we talk about the issues that we face, that you face from a policy standpoint as a state, our communities suffer. We've all seen it. Our communities suffer when we don't properly put people back in a position to be successful when they get out, because they're coming out. We know that. We know that 98% are coming out. We have to be about putting people in a position to truly be successful. And ultimately, which is obviously something that this body deals with, our state budget will be affected significantly. We know the situation in Alabama. We know what the Department of Justice did there. And it's important it's important for me, and I would not be doing this justice if I didn't communicate that I believe long-term reentry support has to be at the core of all of the things that we're doing. So all of the fixing that Commissioner Kane is doing inside the Department of Corrections and all the very positive things we're doing, if I don't contribute the rest of the highway, right? So if we're building a highway from Clinton to Brandon and we get to Jackson and we stop, and you got to go traveling through the woods to get from Jackson to Brandon, that doesn't make much sense, right? We're stopping halfway. We can't do that. We've got to be about the complete pathway. And fortunately, I'm in a position running our prison industries to modernize the work opportunities that we have, to connect with employers, and to put people in a position where before they ever walk out of prison, they're walking into a job. And look, if we do it really right, and if we're successful in some of the things we've talked about with the Hope Alliance and our relationship with the department, we're going to have private employers with work opportunities inside our prison that are hiring their folks directly from that work opportunity, right? That's where we've got to get to. If we want to be truly about the pathway, then we've got to have some serious partnerships in place to ensure that that happens. And then probably most importantly, look, I'll say this, as a Christian, grace and second chances are my hope for my future, right? And so if we're truly about that as a state, and I know that many of you are, then we have to be truly about that for our offender population. So what do we do about that? Well, as I've said, Commissioner Kane and I have worked together hand in hand on many different projects. You can see all of the things that they're doing. And certainly I'm an advocate for all of the different things that Gary and the reentry staff are doing for the department. But one thing we've done, because of the small subset that we're working with in our prison population, which represents about 7% of our total prison population, we've created an organization as an initiative to MPIC called the Hope Alliance. HOPE stands for Helping Offenders Prepare for Excellence. And you can see the logo on the screen. We've got also a website that's up, hopealliancems.com, hopealliancems.com. And so you can kind of get an idea of actually what that looks like. But what we're trying to do is put our inmate population that works for MPIC right now, and hopefully we can grow it outside of the bounds of MPIC, but put them on a path where everything that we've talked about from the reentry of an individual back into society, that it is taken care of before they walk out of prison. And when they walk out, they're walking into a support system. One of the things I've noticed coming not from the prison system and coming into this world a couple of years ago is that, man, it's fractured. We got people all over the state wanting to do things related to reentry, but nobody's talking. I mean, we're literally all over the place. I find out about a new reentry organization every day. I'm like, well, what are they doing? Who are they with? What's the situation? So we've got to pull all those people together. So we created the Hope Alliance to start to bring together every organization underneath this umbrella of the Alliance. So if you are a reentry facility in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, then we need you to be connected to us. If you're a transitional house in Tupelo, we need you to be connected to us, because we need to make sure that you're connected to the source and that the folks that are inside our facilities are already connected with you before they ever get out. Too many times it's about a relationship that mom has with, Pastor John, and he recommends that they go into that facility. Well, that doesn't work. If we're truly serious about reducing our inmate population, then we got to be truly serious about addressing that at the source. And so that's what we are attempting to do through the Hope Alliance. I will point you to Brookings Institute study out of this April 2021. And several points were made, but I'll read you a few. Research has consistently found positive results for employment, with the most recent evaluation showing that work opportunities significantly increase the odds that participants found long-term sustainability in society. Based on the findings and the research they did over several states, the return on investment came out to be about $7,000 per actual participant. So when we talk about real hard numbers, right? I can give you all the facts, and certainly we'll share that with you after today. But there are real numbers that directly correlate to the amount of money that it takes to run the Department of Corrections, and the amount of money it takes to, and the offset of that, to ensure that we're putting people in a position to be successful. But more importantly than that, we have a labor shortage in our state, right? We need people out working. We talk to private employers every day who are saying, I'm not interested. I don't care that they have a felony record. I want to make sure I need somebody in this position. I need to hire these people. And I'm going to let Dante speak to that in just a second. But before I get to that point, I want to go through kind of our 5 core tenets of the Hope Alliance. And I think I can pull them up here. So that just tells you the statewide network of support for offenders during and after incarceration. And certainly we hope to grow that outside of the bounds of MPIC, or frankly, we hope to grow MPIC to the point that we are working with a larger number of our inmate population, which ultimately would have these resources. So the Hope Alliance mission is to connect external support with incarcerated individuals long before they are released, to provide resources to organizations that are supporting returning citizens, to utilize personnel to provide ongoing individualized support after release, and to ensure ongoing employment opportunities for any formerly incarcerated person. And let me speak to that, one of those points there. Look, the reality of our employment situation, and we talk about this all the time, it's not just about finding a job for an inmate, right? Because frankly, the recidivism rate at 4, 5, and 6 years continues to grow. And so what we've got to do is ensure that we're creating a long enough runway that the support is in place so that that individual can get to a point where they've reached long-term sustainability, that all the pieces are in place, and ultimately they're integrating back into their community for good. So the 5 core components, and I'll go through these briefly. I don't want to take too much time. Hope partnerships, and this is just partnerships that we've established to this point, but we certainly want to grow this. And if I don't want anybody to be offended if you're not on here, but these are organizations so far that we have relationships with that have said, yes, absolutely, we want to be involved in the process. And as you see, MPIC and the Department of Corrections are both listed as organizations within the umbrella of the Hope Alliance. And frankly, we need to continue to grow this. But you see a lot of organizations that you recognize there. Second is a pathway. So we've started creating what we're calling Hope plans, and you'll see that in a second. But it's a plan that basically is within 2 years of release for our MPIC employees that detail all achievements they've previously completed, along with a pathway to vocational and on-the-job training, community support, and regulatory needs. So we want to make sure, along with the things that the DOC is doing, that we're putting our staff in a position where we know exactly where they are and what pathway they're on before they get out. That's a slide that kind of tells you, and you can see that on the website. The writing's certainly small, so I'll skip to the next one. Support specialists. So the idea is that as we continue to grow this, we have a staff that works hand in hand with our program coordinators and parole and probation officers, and that staff includes job recruiters, alcohol and drug counselors, family counselors, housing specialists, those educational specialists who are working with our community colleges to ensure that we're placing folks in opportunities around the state, as you heard earlier from Gulf Coast. So within the Hope network, we have these support specialists. And that kind of shows you what, from a regional standpoint, how we're breaking that down. And then this is probably the most important thing. And if you don't take anything else away from the Hope Alliance, I hope you take this away, because this is very important. Hope centers around the state. We've identified 8 areas around the state where we think we need to establish a Hope Center. And that Hope Center is the place where anybody that's touched our correctional system knows that they can go to get the support and get their needs met. We see that as a lighthouse, right? We see that as an opportunity for us to stop. Let's stop with our felons, kind of living in the dark. Let's ensure that we're putting them in a position to have the support they need. They know where they can go, and we've strategically located areas around the state that would work for. But I think ultimately the Hope Center is probably the catalyst of all of this to ensure, because frankly, when you're an inmate, you got to remember this is a specialized group. So when they come out of incarceration, a lot of times they're not wanting to show up at WIC at the WIC site or the WIN Job Center. I'm sorry. Or some of the other different agency department areas to get some help. They need to go to one place, and we need to provide those resources at that particular place. And then lastly, we're working on a staffing agency that is tailored specifically to our offender population to ensure that they have their needs met, that we're placing them in a position. And ultimately, look, I don't control the ban the box issues. That's something that we've talked about at length. I know that we talked about that earlier about Minnesota, and we asked some of those questions. The reality is, from my standpoint, whether or not that's policy, or whether that's policy or not, we want to be in a position where these guys can vouch for somebody and say, yeah, he's a good employer, because that's what we get 9 times out of 10. We're getting asked by the employer, hey, I know he's a felon. Do you vouch for this guy? And we're able to say, yeah, absolutely. He's going to be the employee that we need. Or like CC, look, anybody in the state would be very glad to hire CC to come in and manage their warehouse, because she knows what she's doing. She teaches forklift training. She does all the things that she has to do because she's been given some opportunities, and she's taken advantage of the opportunities that she's been given. I think that's the end of that slide. So that gives you an idea of the 5 core components of the Hope Alliance. But ultimately, what we're trying to do is take our subset population and start to create a plan that could then grow from that population size, right? And ultimately, look, in conjunction with Commissioner Kane, we want to serve as many of our inmates as possible well before they get out. And so with that, let me turn it over to Dante, and I'm going to let him kind of just briefly tell you, in the months that we've been operating under this Hope Alliance umbrella, as far as our re-entry initiative, some of the success that we've had so far.
Thank you, Bradley. Thank you for the reentry committee allowing us to come and speak. I'm gonna be brief. I came on board with MPIC in October, so I'm gonna kind of give you some year-to-date as to what we've done. So from October, of course, we were in the middle of the pandemic, and the number that I'm gonna give you, you probably say that doesn't sound like many, but as the former gentleman said, it takes a lot to stand up a reentry person. So from October to today, we've helped 17 individuals get employment opportunities. But with that, we're talking about taking them from point A to B. If you all have had teenagers or grandchildren, that's kind of like what it is when you're dealing with one of these individuals. It's a day-to-day call, a week-to-week call, quarterly calls to be sure that they're on track to get to the employment opportunity. It never fails. Every person that I come in contact with, when they get ready to turn the curve, some kind of way the tires on flat, something comes up, so it's ongoing things we have to do to get them there. So some of the employment opportunities that we have and the staff have built is with Milwaukee Tools. They have given us the green light to hire individuals. Ingalls, Summit Plastics down in Pike County has committed. We have a supplier at Nissan. Benefield Construction Company just recently hired a gentleman. This gentleman is 65 years old, been incarcerated about 3/4 of his life. A master carpenter, he can take trash and build ships and build all kinds of things out of it. Just got employed this week. It took me 3 months to get him employed. When we had to walk through, because of his criminal record, employers would not give him a chance. But he had family in the North Mississippi area. Myself and another coworker took a car, drove him to the driver's license place, took him to open up a banking account, took him to get health insurance. I mean, it's almost like you have to take some of the folks by the hand and take them to where they need to go. It's not enough just to say, go do this, or go here, or go there. He's 65, all of his family members are deceased just about, or the brother that he has is in his 70s. So he was a case that was unique, but every one of their situations and cases is unique, and a lot of people don't want to take the time that's necessary to pour into them to be sure that they're successful. We can talk all day and put Band-Aids on it, but you have to have people that take them by the hand. And so the other thing is with some of our numbers, this past quarter, we reached about 100 individuals who were fortunate to receive a Department of Employment Security grant. And CC over here provided a lot of the training inside the facilities for those individuals. This quarter, we were able to place 9 individuals in full-time employment opportunities with some of the ones that I listed. CC and her staff provided about 65 folks with forklift training on the inside. We've identified some employers that will give those individuals a chance. 10 of our employees recently completed logistics supply class. And we have an employer, Unified Brands, that has brought on one of the young ladies. She just recently got out maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and looking forward to get into that employment opportunity as a result of that training. And those are just some of kind of the highlights of what we do with the HOPE program.
Thank you, Dante. And so I'll just finish with this. The reality of that is that it takes a lot, and it's not a one size fits all. It's a process, and we've got to ensure that the support is in place to ultimately reduce our prison population by ensuring that we're reducing recidivism and putting people in a position to be successful when they get out. So with that, I'll take any questions you may have.
Chairman Barnett has a couple of questions. Any other members have questions? Chairman Barnett, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bradley, you know, you and I have had some long conversations over the past couple of years as to MPIC involvement in the prison system. So one of my questions is this program, your HOPE Alliance that you're talking about now, is it going to be available to every person that's within the Department of Corrections? And if not, then tell me why, and if there's any access barriers that these individuals may be faced with.
Well, thank you for your question, Chairman Barnett. The reality is, not unlike MNCOR, who we heard testify earlier today, we operate completely based on our own finances. And so what we make, what we sell, the operation that we run, then we have the profit to reinvest into opportunities like this. And so what we're doing is taking profit from MPIC and investing it in reentry efforts. And so as it stands, to your point, I'll answer it kind of 2 different ways. One, as it stands from a budget standpoint, it makes it very difficult for us to help anybody else outside of the confines of MPIC employees. But what we hope we're able to do is expand this to the point where every inmate in the Department of Corrections is in a position to have access to what we're doing here, based on a continued pathway between what the commissioner is doing with vocational training and educational training, and then putting people in a position where they're learning on the job training while they're still incarcerated. So we got to grow that number, but certainly we want as many people as part of ultimately the HOPE Alliance and having that support network as possible. So I would say, if anything, from a staffing standpoint and just a capital expense and operating expense standpoint, it would probably come back to some need for funding from this body for purposes of expanding that network of support across the entire Department of Corrections.
Okay. My second question is nothing new to you that I've asked before. And that is, before, when it was the prison industry, only paid those individuals who did work very small wages for that day. And you know that has been a concern of mine for a long period of time. And so my question is there any consideration on making sure that these individuals are paid more so that they can use a portion of their earnings to perhaps pay some fines and fees that they owe to other municipalities or counties so that when they are released, that they can be released, hopefully not owing anyone anything. Is there been some consideration on that as well?
Yeah, a good question. And so that's something that you and I have talked about at length, and I will answer it in this way. One, so when I came on, understanding how we pay and what that structure was didn't make a lot of sense to me either, right? Ultimately, we want to put people in a position where they have the financial means to be successful when they get out as well. So what we did was we immediately created an opportunity where they basically have the ability based on their effort inside their facilities to double their pay, and then anything that they do inside, in the work opportunity, we match that within 3 years of their release. So if somebody works 36 months for us before they're released, that 36 months, whatever that number is, if it's $2,000 or it's $3,000 in, kind of bonus, if you want to call it that, we match it. So we routinely over the last 6 months have issued checks back out to our inmate population for purposes of fines, for purposes of all these other issues, but anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000, where they're getting access to that money. We hold it in trust, and then they get access to that money when they release. And most of the time, what's happening is our staff is working with parole and probation and all of the, within all of the necessary regulatory issues that they may have to ensure that that money's being used properly. But we've certainly had situations where folks have been able to use it for a down payment on, whether it be a car or, electric bill or other things like that as well. So I want to get to a point where we're finding as many creative ways as possible to ensure that our inmates are put in a position to have the financial means to do it themselves. Ultimately, we don't want to give handouts. We want to make sure that we're putting them in a position to be successful about what they do, and they're doing it, and they bought into it, and really think it's something that can grow.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
I was listening, I promise you. I wanted to ask you, we talked earlier about some issues involving being able to work with the court system, things of that nature. How do you feel like we need to, engage? What do you think we can do to solve some of those problems?
Well, good question. And I think one thing that I did not speak to earlier, in 1990, when MPIC was formed, I think it was really formed in the best way possible. And some of you in here may not even recognize the legal organization of how it was formed, but we're a nonprofit. So instead of being a state agency, we actually are a nonprofit political subdivision of the state, which gives us the ability to operate in some more interesting and workable ways for purposes of doing some things outside of just the scope of what MPIC originally was designed for. So I think that there's probably some opportunity down the road as the reentry court process takes off, as we start to go deeper into some county level things, like with what Sheriff Bailey's doing in Rankin County. I think there's opportunity where we can start to help maneuver and find employment and employ those who may not even have to go into our institutions, that we can actually find work opportunities outside of the walls of prison to prepare them for a job, or to train them in welding, or to train them in plumbing, or to do all those things, to put them in a position to be successful. So I think that the way that we're formed and not being, being able to kind of, move around and be flexible, I think puts us in a unique position that I think we should be, used more in that capacity. I think we should be used more with our court system and our reentry process to, help folks get a skill before they, without having to go through the incarceration process.
Any other questions from any other members? Gentleman Harrison.
I want to talk to you a little bit about the HOPE program. According to your brochure, the HOPE program cost about $1.1 million a year for each facility for it to operate, and an initial cost of $1.6 million to set it up with the facility equipment and the structure. So my first question is, where does that money come from?
Well, good question. The reality is, as I said, we're a fully functioning off of our own financial, P&L balance sheet at this time. And so, you guys don't have to worry about shooting an appropriation over to us each year. We're able to be self-contained and self-sufficient, as the lady from Minnesota said. So from my standpoint, when I look at the landscape of the state and the landscape of funds and kind of where we go from here, I know that certainly both leadership in both the House and the Senate has both publicly acknowledged that we need to be spending, especially some of the COVID dollars that will be coming into the state. We need to be spending some of those dollars in ways that will offset future expenses, and that we're investing that money wisely. Well, to me, when I look at how do we invest those dollars, well, it's clear that when we talk about the cost to incarcerate of $29,000 to $30,000 a year versus the cost to train somebody, put somebody in a job, give somebody a job opportunity, and then put them in a position where they're paying taxes back into the Department of Revenue, I think it's, it has to be at the top of the list of things that we invest in through some of these COVID dollars for purposes of ensuring that we're creating that robust platform of support.
I appreciate your sentiment, but the COVID dollars are one-time money, and the $1.1 million is a reoccurring expense for each facility. Look, I like what I see in this program, but it does come down to money, and we do have to figure out, where we would place that. And looking at some of the components of the program, such as 3 welding simulators, a CDL simulator, et cetera, that seems duplicative of what MDOC is doing. Would you be doing that in conjunction with them and serving even more people? Can you elaborate on your relationship with MDOC and this funding of this equipment that would help constitute what a Hope Center is?
Certainly. So, without question, there's a tremendous need for, the simulator process within the department and within the institutions across our state. I certainly think that there's probably opportunity to work in conjunction with what the department receives and the equipment that they receive, and certainly inside the institutions we would be able to do that. Hope Centers potentially would be in a position where we could move some of that equipment around on trucks and other things like that, so that we're not having to put all those pieces of equipment in one place. But ultimately, to your point, I think it's important to note, and I did note it earlier, we would expect that the Hope Center concept, as we grow it, becomes self-sufficient, no different than MPIC. So what we would not want to do is be in a position where, look, I come from private business, hadn't been doing this a long time. I came into it with fresh eyes, and I'm not ashamed to say that the reality of how I would operate is not coming to the legislature to ask for money. I think that it's important of us and incumbent on us to be in a position where we're finding ways and we're finding paths to produce revenue and to create a sustainable model inside a Hope Center model, that through a staffing agency and through other things where you're actually not having to use state money for reoccurring operating expenses and other things like that.
Okay, and my final question, and thank you for your time, is the current Hope Center you're operating out of is in the Capitol in Jackson?
Yes. So as it is currently, our office on State Street is where we operate all of those. All those operations operate out of. Dante has an office there, and other staff members.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Bradley, you have you wanted Ms. Stringer to present next, is that right?
Yes.
Thank you. She can proceed.
Good afternoon. I just want to thank y'all for letting me speak with y'all today. My name is Cecilia Stringer. As he said, Bradley said, I was a former incarcerated offender and a full-time employee of Mississippi Prison Industries. I just want to say, before I wrote this, after hearing everything that was said today, their idea on how to fix our prison system is pretty much my point of view. They're right. MDOC and Bradley both. Our prison system's broken, y'all. But I'm gonna go on with this. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about my background. I was raised with both parents, a strict Christian household. I was a pretty good student. Although I didn't drop out, I did get my GED. as soon as I dropped out. I had my first child at 18, my second one at 20, third one at 24. I was married to my second child's father. We had a pretty good marriage. I was a soccer mom, cheerleading, sports with my kids, running around crazy, you know, being a mom. One day someone was like, "You want to try this? Give you some extra energy." And I did. Before I knew it, I was an IV drug user. I was in and out of prisons. And it's the last time that I ended up in prison. It was my last time. I wanted better. I didn't know how to get there. I just didn't know how to get there though. I got put in the CWC at Flowwood at the Community Work Center. I got a job with Mississippi Prison Industries, started learning job skills, started taking classes at the CWC for growth skills and just to be a better person, you know. When it came time for my release, Mississippi Prison Industries offered me a job, not only a job, a career. It was a way to give back and be accountable. They helped me gain my instructor certification in forklift training, logistics, and OSHA. I have my OSHA 30. I'm one of MPI success stories, and y'all, they have so many more in their future. I believe, and this is I believe this from my heart. I believe in comprehensive job skills and training is the key to reducing recidivism. I believe the reason our state's numbers are so high is there's no job skills, no life skills, and no one to walk offenders through reentry. It's an overwhelming process entering back into society, and it takes someone to help you through that process. I was one of the blessed ones. I had people supporting me every step of the way. I still have people supporting me every step of the way. With daily is just growing as a person and as an employee. We need people in place to support these offenders. They need hope. They need loving and caring individuals in their lives. Most of these people don't have family, friends, support systems. They don't have anyone to hold them accountable and lead them through the process of re-entering into society. And we want productive members of society. I feel the solution to rehabilitation is job skills in full, and I mean full re-entry teams located in different areas of our state, such as peer supports, re-entry courts, transitional housing. And this has to be a team effort. Not MDOC can do it by themselves, not MPIC can do it by themselves. It has to be a team effort, y'all. We need funding for training programs, transitional housing. We need full staffs to every length to show that we care and we support them. These offenders are not statistics, y'all. They just don't have skills. They don't have skills in how to lead a life. I'm so passionate about this because I've been there. And I came from a good background. I came from, a strict Christian household. We were in church on Sundays. My dad's a pastor at Janus Baptist Church. He has friends that are in high parts of society. Like, I was not raised in the streets. I was not raised like most of these people were. They just don't have no one. And I didn't know where to start, even coming from that good of a background. Y'all, a lot of these people use people's addresses to get out. They get dropped off at the bus station with a few dollars that MDOC has gave them to be released and nowhere to go. And I've seen this at the parole office. An offender had a bus ticket, got to the PO's office, reported to the probation officer, walked out the door and asked me where a shelter was. They didn't even have nowhere to go. They just used somebody's address to get out. Somebody's got to be there to say, "Hey, I got your back. What can we do to help you? Do you have clothes to wear? Do you have an ID? Do you have a social security card? Do you have any job skills? Do you have housing? What can we do to help you re-enter society?" Y'all, this has to be a team effort. We, MPIC and MDOC both need full staffs of caring individuals. Our MDOC probation and parole officers, their agents, their caseloads are so high. And I spoke with a couple of district managers of the officers and agents, and they want to help them, but their resources are so limited. They're limited in what they can do for them. I feel this is where MPIC comes in. We have a chance to work with offenders before release and continue long after they're released. Right now, we're limited on what we can do. Our staff is nowhere being close to a full staff. We're doing as much as each of us can, but want to do so much more. We have a vision of what can be accomplished through employment opportunities. I have been able to train parolees and even drug court participants thanks to this program. Also, thanks to the bright new faces and the team we have at MPIC right now, we're looking at so many new possibilities of training and job placements, but we need more. We need job training for offenders in and out of prisons. I feel that we're barely skimming the surface. I believe we should have training centers with job placement services throughout Mississippi for ex-offenders. I feel that this can and will be accomplished with a full staff and funding. I believe in the vision that our team has for Mississippi, and I believe it will affect and reduce the numbers of recidivism.
Any questions?
We appreciate your testimonial and your input regarding the MPIC and the benefit it's been to you. Bradley, you have anything you want to add in closing?
No, I think that's it. You know, the reality is that we got to have more success stories like Cece. I mean, look, they're all over the department, and it's our job to work in conjunction with the Department of Corrections to ensure that we're creating a full, comprehensive pathway that leads to long-term sustainability. And she's certainly an example of that. We're thankful to have her, and thankful certainly to this body for allowing us to speak today.
Thank you all for your presentation. Chairman Burnett, you have anything to say? Martin? Nick? I entertain a motion. Rise and report.